The wind screamed through the broken streets of Calith, 7, carrying dust and the bitter scent of rusted metal. Shadows stretched across the ruined city, where buildings had collapsed into jagged skeletons and alien technology hummed faintly from the wreckage. Few dared to walk these streets and even fewer survived. Yet Elias Thorne moved with purpose, his boots crunching over shattered glass and twisted metal. He had survived wars, collapsed colonies and dying planets, but Calith, 7 tested everything he knew about survival. He kept his gaze low, scanning for movement. Every corner could hide danger: rogue scavengers, malfunctioning drones, or alien creatures that had adapted to the harsh environment. The city had a rule of its own: take what you need, trust no one, and live if you can. Elias followed that rule, but the strange sound that carried over the wind made him pause. A soft whimper, almost childlike, echoed from the ruins ahead. Elias crouched behind a broken wall and peered through the shadows. There, among the ruins of a collapsed market, was a tiny creature. Its scales were dull and patchy and its wings looked too small for its body. In its claws, it clutched a heap of small toys and scraps of metal. It moved carefully, looking around nervously as though afraid of being seen. Elias's heart tightened. The creature was a dragon, but not a full-grown one. A baby trying to survive alone in a world that would kill it without hesitation. He hesitated. His first thought was caution. Approaching could draw danger, and scavengers often set traps near rare creatures. But he felt something else, a tug at his conscience he couldn't ignore. The dragon's eyes were wide and fearful, shimmering with intelligence and confusion. It wasn't just trying to survive, it was pleading. Elias moved slowly, keeping low and making his steps quiet. He carried nothing but a small pack with rations and a few tools, but even these could be used to show that he wasn't a threat. The dragon froze when it saw him but did not run. Instead, it hissed softly, a sound more like a question than a warning. "You don't have to fight alone," Elias whispered. He kept his voice calm even though every nerve in his body screamed to be ready for attack. He lowered one hand, showing no weapons. The dragon tilted its head, curious but wary. Days had passed for the dragon without anyone to help. It had learned quickly, selling what little it had to anyone who passed, scavenging scraps for food, and hiding when shadows moved in the streets. Elias could see the weight of that survival in its eyes. Hunger, fear, and loneliness carved deep lines into the small creature's expression. And yet, there was determination, a spark that refused to die. Elias crouched closer, moving slowly. "I can help," he said. "I know how to survive here. I can teach you, or just keep you safe for now." The dragon's eyes flickered, and it inched forward, still clutching its toys. Its tiny wings twitched nervously. Suddenly, a sharp metallic clatter rang from the far side of the ruins. Both Elias and the dragon froze. He scanned the area. A scavenger had been following him, a shadow in the distance. The figure stepped closer, weapons ready. The scavenger probably thought the dragon was a prize, or worse, a source of trade for the wrong people. Elias didn't hesitate. He moved in front of the dragon, drawing a small plasma flare from his pack. The light flared in the dusty air, bright and startling. The scavenger cursed and ducked behind a pillar, hesitating. Elias's voice was firm. "Back off. This creature isn't yours." His heart pounded, but his courage did not falter. Even in a world designed to crush the weak, he refused to let fear decide the outcome. The dragon pressed against him, tiny claws digging lightly into his sleeve. Elias felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. It wasn't just survival anymore. He couldn't let this little life be traded, sold, or destroyed. Not when he could act. He scanned the area, his mind calculating the best way out. He could distract the scavenger long enough for both of them to escape. It would take speed, precision, and a little luck, qualities humans had survived on for centuries. The wind picked up, dust whipping through the empty streets. Elias grabbed the dragon gently, careful not to hurt it. Its wings fluttered in panic, but it didn't resist. "Hold on," he said, sprinting toward a narrow alley that offered some cover. Behind them, the scavenger shouted and began to pursue, but Elias's footfalls were quick, precise. He ducked, twisted, and led the dragon through the broken city, using every shadow and alley to stay ahead. For the first time, the dragon's small voice made a sound almost like a laugh, a mix of relief and surprise. Elias allowed himself a faint smile. Survival wasn't guaranteed yet, but together they had taken the first step. Against all odds, human courage had created a chance, a spark in a world that had forgotten hope. As they reached the edge of a half-collapsed research hub, Elias knew this was only the beginning. The city was alive with dangers and the scavenger might not give up so easily. But he also knew that in his arms was something rare, a life worth protecting and a creature that had already survived far too much to be abandoned now. And deep in the ruins, as the wind howled and dust choked the streets, both human and dragon understood the unspoken truth. Surviving Caliph 7 would demand courage beyond anything they had ever known, and the real test had yet to begin. The research hub was barely standing, its walls cracked and warped from years of neglect. Elias and Kale ducked inside, the baby dragon trembling in his arms. The air smelled of metal, dust, and something faintly electric, the hum of old alien machinery that still held power. For a moment it was quiet. Too quiet. Elias's instinct screamed that danger was never far behind on Caliph 7. "Stay close," he whispered, placing Kale on a pile of broken equipment. The dragon's small claws clutched his sleeve as if it understood every word. Elias scanned the room. Supplies were scarce. Mostly scraps, broken circuits, and a few containers of rations left behind by the last humans who had died here. But even scraps were better than nothing, and survival depended on making the most of every small advantage. Days passed. Elias scavenged the surrounding ruins for food and clean water while Kale explored the hub, learning to navigate broken machinery and small alcoves. Despite his size, Kale's intelligence became obvious. He figured out how to power small lights using alien tech, rigged a simple sensor to warn them of intruders, and even discovered hidden corners where water had pooled after storms. Elias watched in amazement. The dragon's cleverness rivaled that of humans who had survived harsh planets for decades. But survival was never simple. One evening, as Elias returned from scavenging a partially collapsed plaza, he spotted movement near the hub's entrance. Shadows shifted unnaturally, and a faint metallic glint told him that scavengers were approaching. Their numbers were small, but even a handful could overwhelm him. And Kale was no ordinary cargo. If captured, the dragon would be sold or killed. Elias's heart pounded, but he forced calm. Panic would get them killed. He crouched behind a wall, observing the intruders. They were armed with plasma rifles, their eyes sharp for prey. Elias quickly calculated. The hallways were narrow, and the hub's unstable floor could work to their advantage. He whispered to Kale, who nodded instinctively, his eyes bright with understanding. When the scavengers entered, Elias moved with precision. He activated a small device Kale had shown him, triggering a burst of sparks and a sudden flare of light. The intruders yelped and stumbled, giving Elias the first edge. He dashed through the shadows, moving silently but quickly. Kale followed, small and agile, using the dim corridors to avoid detection. The hub became a maze of traps, shadows, and sudden flashes of light, all designed to disorient the attackers. One of the scavengers caught sight of Kale and lunged. Elias reacted instantly, tackling the man to the ground. A struggle ensued, sparks flying from the nearby machinery as the scavenger fired wildly. Elias took a shallow burn to his shoulder but didn't release his grip. The dragon hissed, a small jet of flame escaping from its mouth, startling the intruder enough for Elias to push him back. The remaining scavengers hesitated, unsure of what the tiny dragon could do. Elias took advantage of the pause, ducking behind a broken console and firing a flare at the floor. Sparks cascaded, creating a barrier of confusion. He and Kale moved together, fluidly, instinctively. Every step was calculated, every risk measured. Survival demanded courage, but it also demanded intelligence, and Elias had both in abundance. After a tense chase through the hub, the scavengers retreated. Elias pressed a hand to Kale, checking for injuries. The dragon flinched but was unharmed. Relief washed over Elias, but he didn't relax. Caliph 7 had no mercy, and each day could bring a worse challenge. That night, as they huddled near a small generator for warmth, Elias reflected on what they had survived. Hunger, exposure, and ruthless scavengers could break most humans, but together they had outsmarted danger. Kale curled against him, tiny wings trembling from exhaustion but still alert. Elias whispered promises of safety, even though he knew the planet would test them again. In the following days they adapted further. Elias taught Kale how to recognize traps and scavenger tactics. Kale taught Elias how to manipulate alien tech, using small devices to create alarms, light decoys, or even rudimentary defenses. Together they became a team, each complementing the other's strengths. Where Elias provided courage and human ingenuity, Kale provided instinct, cleverness, and speed. But Caliph 7's dangers were not limited to scavengers. One morning, Elias woke to the sound of distant alarms. a signal from malfunctioning drones that patrolled the ruined city. They were programmed to destroy unauthorized life forms, and their sensors were precise. The hub's walls shook as the drones drew near, their engines whining with deadly precision. Elias realized they had no choice but to flee. Staying would mean certain death. He scooped Kale into his arms, feeling the baby dragon tremble with fear. "We move fast. No mistakes," he said. The city outside awaited, a gauntlet of ruined streets, unstable buildings, and predators both human and alien. Every step forward was dangerous, but Elias's mind worked tirelessly, planning routes, calculating timing, and anticipating hazards. Survival wasn't about strength alone, it was about courage, intelligence, and the willingness to act when failure meant death. As they slipped into the shadows, a sudden roar echoed across the ruins. Elias froze. Kale's small wings bristled. Something bigger, something dangerous, was near. He tightened his grip on the dragon and scanned the horizon. The wind carried movement, shapes that didn't belong to humans. The rules of Caliph 7 were clear. The brave survived, the clever thrived, and the weak perished. And Elias knew that tomorrow, the true test of both courage and wit would arrive, bringing challenges far greater than scavengers or drones. For now, all he could do was move forward, fast, silent, and ready to fight for both their lives. The horizon was dark, but Elias's determination burned brighter than ever. The city's ruins stretched endlessly, a maze of broken streets and collapsed buildings. Elias moved carefully, Kale tucked safely under one arm, their steps silent against the cracked concrete. Each gust of wind carried dust and debris, hiding dangers that could strike at any moment. He had learned to trust his instincts, and they were screaming that something unusual waited ahead. Deep within the city, beyond a barricade of rubble and shattered walls, Elias spotted it, a hidden enclave of alien machinery. The hum of energy was faint but unmistakable. Ancient devices blinked with life, their purpose long forgotten by humans, but their power could change everything. Supplies here meant food, water, tools, and, most importantly, an advantage in a world that refused to forgive weakness. But reaching it was impossible by normal means. The enclave was protected by automated sentinels, sleek and deadly drones programmed to annihilate any intruder. Their sensors swept the ruins with precision, and their energy cannons could incinerate a human in seconds. Many had tried before, none had survived. Elias studied the patterns, noting every pause, every arc of their scanning lights. Survival meant more than courage, it meant strategy, timing, and perfect execution. Kale's small eyes followed him, watching every calculation. The dragon was learning, observing how humans approached impossible odds. Elias crouched beside a crumbling wall and whispered, "We have one shot. You'll go first, slip inside, grab the core, and I'll create the distraction. Can you do it?" Kale's wings twitched nervously, but a flicker of determination crossed his face. He wasn't just a passenger, he was part of the plan. As dusk fell, Elias moved into position. He triggered a series of small flares, each one flashing briefly and drawing the sentinel's attention. Sparks danced across the rubble, painting the shadows with blinding light. The drones paused, their sensors scanning the chaos. It was enough. Kale slipped through a narrow gap in the perimeter, his small body moving with agility humans could never match. Inside the enclave, the alien machinery glowed faintly, power cores suspended in anti-gravity fields. Kale moved carefully, using his claws to manipulate panels and override locks. Every motion was precise. One mistake and alarms would sound. Outside, Elias kept the sentinels distracted, moving through the shadows, tossing flares and small noisemakers to draw their attention. The drones whirred, shifted, and pivoted, but Elias's calculations kept him just ahead of danger. Suddenly, one sentinel rotated faster than expected, its sensors locking onto him. Elias rolled behind a broken column, feeling the heat of its energy cannon brush past. His shoulder burned slightly from the flare's recoil, but he ignored it. Panic was the enemy here. Only control and courage could save them. Inside, Kale reached the core. His claws wrapped around the glowing device, and he activated a rudimentary containment field using his own innate energy. Sparks and light flared around him, but he held steady. The Enclave had not seen a life form move this quickly, and the drone alarms had not yet detected his presence. Every second felt like an eternity. Outside, the sentinels were adjusting, moving more aggressively, their scanning arcs tighter, their speed faster. Elias realized they had mere seconds before the entire Enclave would activate full defenses. He grabbed another flare and tossed it toward a corner, igniting a burst of sparks and smoke. The drones veered, giving Kale the window he needed. With the core secured, Kale darted toward the exit, his tiny body slipping through narrow gaps, using speed and clever maneuvers humans could only dream of. Elias covered him, placing small traps, wires rigged to debris, flashing lights, to block pursuit. The sentinels were precise, but Elias's ingenuity created confusion, turning calculated chaos into their ally. The moment Kale emerged, Elias sprinted alongside, his muscles screaming with exertion. One sentinel fired, energy streaking past them, scorching the concrete, but he ducked low, dragging the dragon into cover. Another burst of sparks and debris blocked the sentinel's line of sight. Elias and Kale ran, weaving through the ruins as the drones recalibrated. Finally, they reached a partially collapsed bridge on the outskirts of the enclave. Elias used the last of his traps to trigger a controlled collapse. Concrete and metal tumbled down, blocking the drone's path. Kale looked up at him, eyes wide with awe and relief. The dragon had not only survived, but he had done it through courage, intelligence, and trust in a human who refused to fail. Elias sank to one knee, catching his breath. The adrenaline pulsed through his veins, and his shoulder throbbed from the burns, but there was a spark of triumph in his chest. Kale curled against him, exhausted but unharmed. "We did it," Elias whispered. "We actually did it." Yet the city was far from safe. The sentinels would return, more alert, more deadly, and scavenger groups would surely hear of their success. This was not victory, it was survival, temporary and fragile. Elias knew the real challenge was just beginning. The core they carried could tip the balance, but using it meant facing dangers even greater than drones or scavengers. As the sun disappeared behind the jagged skyline, Elias looked at Kale. "Rest now. Tomorrow we make a plan, one that either saves us completely, or ends us both." Kale's tiny wings flinched, but he pressed closer, sensing the truth in Elias's voice. The bond between human and dragon had deepened, forged under fire and risk, but their trial was far from over. And somewhere in the ruins, the faint hum of alien machinery continued, waiting for the next challenger, brave, or foolish, enough to test its deadly power. Elias and Kale moved through the ruins with careful precision. Every corner of Calith, 7 carried danger, but Elias had learned to read the shadows, to anticipate the world's hostility. The stolen core pulsed faintly in Kale's claws, a treasure of unimaginable value, and a magnet for anyone desperate enough to survive. Word of their success had already spread. Scavengers, desperate for power and profit, would come. And now they had. The gang found them at the edge of a deep crater, where jagged rock formed natural barricades. Their leader, a tall man with a cybernetic arm and a scar running across his face, grinned when he saw Elias. "So, the human thinks he can play with alien tech and live?" he sneered. "Hand over the dragon and the core and we might let you walk away." Elias didn't flinch. He could see the greed in their eyes, the overconfidence that comes from underestimating humans. Survival on Calith, 7 had taught him that courage alone wasn't enough. It had to be paired with intelligence, quick thinking, and calculated risk. "You'll get nothing," he said, his voice steady. "Kale isn't yours and neither am I." The gang advanced cautiously, weapons raised, energy rifles humming. Elias crouched behind a jagged rock, placing Kale safely on the ground. The baby dragon hissed and flared tiny flames from his mouth, small sparks that illuminated the shadows. Even a hint of aggression from Kale was enough to make the scavengers hesitate. Elias's mind raced. There was no way to fight them head-on, they outnumbered him 5-1, and their weapons could obliterate him in seconds. But the terrain was his ally. The crater was full of rubble, twisted metal, and old alien machinery. He could use it to create traps and misdirect them. If he could turn their confidence into vulnerability, they might falter. He whispered instructions to Kale. "Follow my lead. Distract. Confuse. Lead them where I need them." Kale's wings flicked nervously, but he understood. The dragon dashed forward, leaping from rock to rock, flames flickering to draw attention. The scavengers fired, but Kale's small size and speed made him almost impossible to hit. Elias triggered his first trap, a hidden cable connected to a pile of debris. Sparks flew as it collapsed partially, sending metal sheets and broken pipes clattering to the ground. The gang hesitated, unsure of what had triggered the chaos. Elias used the moment, sprinting along a narrow ledge with Kale following. Another trap went off behind them, a controlled burst of plasma from a salvaged alien device. One scavenger stumbled into it, shouting in pain. The leader roared, advancing with his cybernetic arm glowing. Elias calculated his next move. He led the gang through the crater, weaving between jagged rocks, forcing them into narrow channels where their numbers counted for nothing. Kale darted ahead, using small illusions and flames to make the gang misjudge their path. Elias had studied every shadow, every weak point in the terrain, and he used it mercilessly. But the leader was cunning. He realized the traps and flares were coordinated, designed to manipulate them. He signaled his men to split, attempting to flank Elias. In a heartbeat, Elias grabbed a small plasma charge and tossed it near the gang's path. It erupted in a controlled detonation, sending dust and sparks into the air. The gang scrambled and the leader cursed. Elias took advantage, moving quickly to a higher ledge, using a fallen alien panel as cover. Kale flared, leaping toward the gang with a sudden burst of flame and a shrill roar. The fire startled them, forcing the leader to step back. Elias used the opening to push the gang into a narrow chute, a natural trap formed by collapsed buildings. The walls were unstable. One wrong step and the rubble could collapse on top of them. The leader hesitated, but greed overpowered caution. He lunged for the dragon and Elias acted. He triggered a series of small detonations along the walls, sending rocks tumbling. The chute collapsed partially, pinning the gang below without lethal force but removing them from the fight. Dust filled the air, sparks flew from damaged alien circuits and silence fell. Elias exhaled, scanning for any remaining threats. Kale flapped his wings, exhausted but unharmed. The gang had underestimated the bond between human and dragon, and they had paid the price. Elias approached Kale, placing a reassuring hand on his head. "We did it. Together," he whispered. "Not because of luck but because we refused to quit." The sun had nearly set, casting the ruins in a warm, golden light. The crater, once a trap, now served as a vantage point. Elias looked out over Calith 7's shattered cityscape. Dangers still lurked, rogue drones, other scavengers and the harsh environment, but for the first time he felt the weight of possibility instead of fear. Kale nuzzled against him, small flames flickering from his mouth in a gesture Elias understood as gratitude. They had survived an impossible ambush, defied overwhelming odds, and proven that courage paired with intelligence could overcome brute force. The baby dragon's eyes gleamed with trust, and Elias felt a surge of pride. Together they were not just surviving, they were rewriting what survival meant. As the wind picked up, carrying dust across the ruins, Elias knew the next challenge would be even greater. But he also knew that humans with courage, ingenuity, and heart could face it. He tightened his grip on Kale, ready to move forward. Whatever awaited them in the darkness of Calith 7, they would face it together. The horizon darkened, but their determination burned brighter than ever, a promise that no world, alien or broken, could crush the bond between a human and a dragon who refused to surrender. And somewhere in the shadows, distant movement suggested that the world had not finished testing them yet. But Elias was ready. The sun rose slowly over Calith 7, casting a pale gold across the ruins. The air was thick with dust and the smell of scorched metal, but for the first time in weeks, Elias felt a quiet calm. He sat on the edge of a cliff, Kale perched beside him, wings folded, eyes scanning the horizon. They were alive. Against scavengers, drones, and the deadly planet itself they had survived. Elias looked at the dragon, his small friend now more confident and alert than ever. Kale's scales glinted faintly in the morning light, brighter than the dull, battered gray they had been when Elias first found him. He had survived because Elias had refused to give up, but Elias had also survived because Kale had learned, adapted, and fought beside him. Their bond had grown stronger with every challenge, a connection that neither human nor dragon had expected. They had come far, but the planet was still dangerous. Supplies were low, and the stolen alien core hummed faintly in Kale's claws, a reminder that they were not yet safe. Elias had to decide their next step carefully. The core was powerful, but it could draw attention from others who would not hesitate to kill for it. Using it meant risk, but it also meant opportunity. Elias stood, scanning the ruins below. Distant figures moved through the broken city. More scavengers. More drones. The planet never rested, and survival demanded constant vigilance. But Elias had learned to trust more than weapons. He had learned to trust ingenuity, courage, and the bond he shared with Kale. The baby dragon nudged his hand, reminding him that they were not alone in facing the challenges ahead. He led Kale down a narrow path to a partially collapsed laboratory, a place they could use as shelter and base. Elias had noticed it days ago, but he had waited until now to approach. The entrance was blocked by debris, but with Kale's help, they managed to shift the rubble just enough to slip inside. The lab was dark, filled with dormant alien machinery, but it had water storage and food packs left behind by explorers long gone. For the first time they had more than just survival, they had a place to regroup. As Elias unpacked supplies, Kale explored the lab, his small claws tracing circuits and panels. "You're going to be smarter than me soon," Elias muttered with a small smile, impressed by the dragon's growing ingenuity. Kale chirped softly, almost as if he understood. Together they began to organize the lab, making traps, defenses, and small devices that would alert them to intruders. This was more than survival now, it was preparation. They were building a stronghold on a hostile world. Days turned into weeks. Elias and Kale adapted further, using their combined intelligence to improve their chances. Kale's ability to manipulate alien technology amazed even Elias, and the dragon began to experiment with small energy devices, creating alarms and rudimentary weapons. Elias taught Kale to use strategy, to predict human and drone behavior. The two worked as a team, each learning from the other, forming a partnership that defied everything Calith 7 had thrown at them. One evening as they watched the horizon, Elias spoke softly, almost to himself. "We've survived so much, but there's more to do." Kale curled against him, sensing the truth in his words. Survival wasn't enough. They had to thrive, to ensure that neither scavengers nor the planet's dangers could take away the life they had fought so hard to protect. The alien core hummed faintly in Kale's claws, a reminder of the power they now held. Elias had considered using it to leave Calith 7 entirely, to escape the planet's cruelty, but he realized something. Their strength wasn't just in the core. It was in their courage, their intelligence, and their bond. That was something no technology could replace. That was what made them unstoppable. A sudden roar echoed from the canyon below. Elias tensed. Kale flared his wings instinctively, flames flickering in response. Another scavenger gang? Another rogue drone? Elias raised his hand, signaling calm. "Whatever comes, we face it together," he said. The dragon chirped, ready. They had survived impossible odds before. They could do it again. In the following days the lab became more than a shelter. It became a symbol. Scavengers who once feared the baby dragon now whispered about the human who could outsmart any threat. Others spoke of Kale, a clever, fierce creature who had survived the harshest world imaginable. Together they had turned fear into respect. Elias and Kale ventured out carefully, mapping the ruins, finding safe water sources and salvaging tech. Their teamwork made them nearly invincible, and they became a legend on Calith 7, a human who refused to surrender and a dragon who refused to be weak. One morning Elias placed a hand on Kale's small head. "We've done it. We survived. Not because of luck, not because of weapons, but because we refused to quit." Kale nuzzled him in return, a quiet affirmation of trust and loyalty. They had faced death together and now they had life. Real life. As the sun climbed higher, illuminating the jagged horizon, Elias realized the true victory. It wasn't the alien core. It wasn't the defeated gangs or the avoided drones. It was the bond between human and dragon, courage and intelligence working together against impossible odds. That bond ensured survival, and more than survival. It ensured hope. Kale flapped his wings once, small flames dancing harmlessly in the air, and Elias smiled. The world of Calith 7 was still dangerous, still cruel, but it no longer felt hopeless. Together they had carved a future from ruin. Together they had proved that humans could overcome anything. And for Elias that was the ultimate triumph. Not just staying alive but giving life to someone who had nothing, and discovering in the process that true heroism lay not in power or numbers, but in courage, intelligence, and the willingness to protect what mattered most. The horizon stretched endlessly, full of danger and opportunity alike. Elias tightened his grip on Kale, and the dragon pressed close. Whatever challenges came next they would face them side by side. For on Calith 7, in a world that sought to break them, humans had proven once again that bravery and heart could change fate. And somewhere beyond the ruins the planet waited, ready to test them again, but this time Elias and Kale would be ready.